I was telling Bishop Derek at the morning Ash Wednesday service that Lent is actually my favorite liturgical season. And my favorite service of the year is Maundy Thursday. With its darkness and solemnness. And I mentioned to him, I don't know if that speaks to a morbidity within myself, but I like Lent and Maundy Thursday and the penitence of the night. Lent is a season, and tonight is a service which should challenge us. As we go through this time, we should feel the confrontation of God, maybe even the offense, by the mere suggestion that maybe we are not as right with God as we should be. Maybe we have drifted off into spiritual complacency. So part of me wants to give a sermon that will offend you, that you will not like, that you will be upset about. However, a theme of Lent is not just the wrathful judgment of God. There is this undercurrent of God's love and God's grace. We look deeply into ourselves and notice our frailty and our brokenness and our need for God, knowing that God is there to offer us redemption and salvation. So part of me wants to give a sermon that will comfort you in this time. And we'll talk of God's love and God's grace. I'll leave it up to you at the end to try to figure out which side I landed upon. For Christmas this past year, Alicia gave me the 2-volume set of Charles Spurgeon's autobiography, which I happily dove into. And in one of the chapters, it speaks about how there was a company in the United States who took it upon themselves to arrange for Spurgeon's Sunday morning sermons to be telegraphed over to the colonies, and they would then print it and distribute it. However, probably with the attempt to save money, they instructed those who were to be telegraphing the sermons that the sermons had to be telegraphed over, quote, omitting all the little words. And then, obviously, they thought they would be able to reprint them and reinsert all the words, thereby saving them money, only to find that the sermons never came out quite right and were never as good as Spurgeon himself gave. Sometimes the little words are kind of important. Our first reading from Joel begins with really a word of doom and gloom. Joel speaks harshly to Israel. You have gone astray. You have forsaken your connection with God, and your spiritual lives have waned thin. Because of all of that, you now sit under the possibility of judgment. It's a harsh message that Joel brings. God is sounding the alarm. God is alerting the people that their spiritual lives are in crisis. Because sin unchecked has consequences. It destroys our souls. And when that day comes, when the day of the Lord finally arrives, it will be a day of darkness. Yes, for those who are united with God, it is a day of salvation. It is a day of bliss. But for those who have wandered away, it will be a day of gloom, a day to be feared. And so in his love and mercy, God calls them to return, to fall in love with him again, to pledge him their hearts. Underneath this message is a word of hope. And we see that profoundly, I think, in 2 small words. Even now. Even now, in this declaration of the great and terrible day of the Lord, even now, in the time when all seems lost for wayward Israel, even now, when it seems that God should just discard the wicked forever, even now, says the Lord, return to me with all your heart. God extends his hands in grace and mercy. This night of Ash Wednesday, as we enter into the season of Lent, we hear those same words, but not as lifeless speech spoken to people long past. We need to hear them spoken to us. We need to hear the Spirit whisper into our lives. What does it mean in your life, as it is today, to hear God say to you, even now, return to me? What does that even now refer to? Those are the important questions that we ask ourselves as we enter into this time which provides a wonderful opportunity for self-examination. That's what Lent is about, turning inward, looking into ourselves. All the talk about what we will give up in Lent or what we will take on or all the holy hubbub that we will do, it all flows out of this deep internal look at our spiritual lives. What does your spiritual life look like? Where are the places where you need to return to God? What are you struggling with? It could be that when you look within, you see a sense of complacency, a sense of your spirit having gone dry. What once was a vivid spark of faith has gradually simmered down, and you feel that there is now a place of spiritual dryness deep within. You didn't intend it. It's just that as the years have gone by, it has reduced your life with God to something that runs kind of on automation. It just occurs, and you never even think about it or dive deep into it. But because of it, there is this feeling that you are spiritually unfulfilled or even spiritually exhausted, as the stuff of our spiritual lives, instead of leading us into joy and freedom, become big weights that we carry around. Even now, says the Lord. Even now, amid having drifted into a dryness of faith, even now, feeling that your spiritual life is kind of routine, even now, return to me, says the Lord. Maybe you feel spiritually turned around. Maybe you feel lost or confused. The complexity of our lives seem to continually crowd out the space which we would hold fast for devotion. There seems little time in which we can fully embrace God's presence. And what is more, because we are so jam-packed full of other things, we have been left with a sense of inability to speak about the matters of our soul. How do we even talk about the things deep within? Maybe you just don't know how to describe your relationship with God or the words to say. Maybe you don't know what it means to listen to God. You hear talk about heeding the voice of God or listening, and you just don't know what that means. And so when you look deep within, you find a bunch of questions. How exactly does doing without chocolate or coffee in my life help me tune into God? How do I know that God is speaking into my life? And if God is speaking, how do I recognize that voice in the first place? Even now, says the Lord. Even now, amid all your questions and all your wanderings. Even now, when you may not know which way is up or where God is leading you, even now, in times where faith seems to me more about doubts than certainties, even now, return to me, says the Lord. Of course, the question is, how? How are we supposed to return to the Lord? Well, Joel says, rend your hearts and not your garments. Return to God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love. Lent is about our hearts more than our stomachs or our computers. We choose to give up social media or emails or YouTube or whatever it is, or our clothing. You know, with that phrase, rend your hearts and not your garments, I have this picture in my mind of Superman, right? Or I should say Clark Kent. You know, running down the alley when he is called into service, ripping his shirt and declaring the super underneath. See, that's what the contemporary world calls our disciplines, right? There are spiritual feats of muscle that we go through. And at the end of the 40 days, we are able to arrive at a place of pride saying, look how super I have been in Lent. Look how great I have been. If we rend our garments and not our hearts at the end of Lent, all we have are torn clothes. And nothing really changes. There's no amendment of life. There's no transformation. There is no deepening of our walk with God. But God calls us to rend our hearts, to spend some time looking there. Wherever your treasure is, there lies your heart. Outward fasting that we so often talk about in Lent is beneficial only when we see that refraining from our treasures in life is to allow our hearts to be filled with God more deeply. We create the space for God to pour more of God's self in. And at the end of the process, we should be markedly different. We should not feel beaten up, or that we have gone through a 40-day boot camp of religiosity. We should not feel weary. We should feel renewed in our relationship with God. We should feel that our life with God has changed. It has grown. It has matured. And we should feel excited about living a life of resurrection. That is the goal of Lent. So rend your hearts and return to God. Bless you as you go through your abstinences, choosing to give up whatever you decide to give up. Bless you as you look within and find times of confessions or places where you are called into service, all of which occur sometimes in Lent and are a focus of Lent. Bless you as you do all of these outward signs, but may they serve only to a deeper blessing of opening your heart before God and grasping Him more tightly.